Hey, what's up? Day three. I'd had a really interesting conversation with some friends today, and it got me thinking about the few conversations I've had over the last while. It's this concept that we're moving into this extreme society, an all or nothing, left or right or wrong, with us or against us kind of society. It came up a few times in the kind of conversations we were talking about, fitness. You're either a slob or you're shredded. Nutrition. You either eat garbage or you have to adopt some like radically strict diet that doesn't allow you any margin for error or joy. You look at the political rhetoric, whether it's in the States, which is just more people are familiar with it because of its volume, I think, but it exists here in Canada as well. It's this inability to find middle ground, and I kind of touched on it a little bit yesterday with my post about conflict, but I think that we need to start living in the gray. We need to start recognizing that the extremes of life very rarely represent most of who we are. The conversation that I had earlier today was about things that are pleasurable and to the extent that we should allow them into our lives. It came down to concepts of whether it was sex or booze or food or gambling or whatever. There are people who will advocate that you should not enjoy any of those things because it's a gateway to bad behavior. It's the way, the path to immorality or lack of discipline, or it's going to derail all the progress you're trying to make. And then of course there are some of the pure hedonists who are like, F it, you only live once, YOLO, enjoy everything and don't really think about it. And I mean, they're a little less common than the abstainers, but we're trying to have this conversation saying like, well, you can do a little bit. You can enjoy a drink every now and then. I mean, obviously, if you're someone who's dealing with addictions, I think that you shouldn't. I think that abstinence from whatever you're addicted to is probably a decent course of action. I mean, I'm fortunate I've not had to deal with that, so I'm certainly not an expert in it. But, I guess the point is that we're creating this polarized environment where, while yesterday I talked a little bit about some of the challenges of resolving conflict, I think more importantly, we should try to not create so much conflict in the first place, right? Is how often do we attach a label to someone? Do we make certain extreme assumptions about what they see or view or think? And then that becomes their identity. That becomes everything that they are. Politics is an easy one in Canada, whether you're sort of a conservative on one end all the way down to like the Greens and the NDP and I guess liberals are sort of on the edge, or Republican Democrats or whatever. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of willingness to say, well, I kind of agree with some of these points over here, but some of these points over here, and maybe we don't need to take such an extreme view of everything. Whenever we start to spin out to the extremes, I find you create this pull. There's a counter pull, I think, that the world wants to be in equilibrium. And when we sit at the extremes, we create this tension. And the further away these points become, the more at odds they are. The more tension that's created. And obviously we're further away from any common ground. And this wild need to be at the extremes, I mean, first of all, I think it's lazy, right? I mean, someone tells you that something is bad or something is good, you don't have to necessarily form your own opinions. You just have to believe it to be true, and then you're there. So it's lazy, and that's never a good place to start. But being willing to have a conversation and not having our identity so wrapped up in a view or a position, but rather having our identity wrapped up in a willingness to listen and to talk and to recognize other alternatives, that I think is more important. Putting in the work of understanding and having the courage to say, well, I agree with some things that you're saying, but not everything. And then being mature enough when someone comes to you and says, well, I believe and or I agree with one of the things that you've said, but I don't really agree with this. To not be outraged, to not be polarized. The world isn't with us or against us kind of thing, but we're creating that. The world really should be about finding the commonalities, finding the middle ground, living in the gray, as I've been saying lately. It's not black or white. It's not left or right. It's way more complicated than that. And while simple sometimes feels nice, and there's an elegance to simplicity when you think about things like design, right, or certain structures, the reality is when you get into it, the day-to-day messiness of being a human being and all that that means, that comes with complexity and challenges and emotions and frustrations. Be courageous enough to accept that not everyone has to be with you entirely and that not everyone is against you entirely. Be courageous enough to explore different avenues and put in the effort to do some homework and to find what that middle ground may represent. So I'm not entirely sure that I've articulated this as clearly as I would have liked, but it's something that's been bothering me because I'm seeing it in almost every facet of life. I either love you or I hate you. You're either amazing or you're an idiot. You're either this or you're that. And that polarizing will tear us apart because that's literally what we're doing. We're literally tearing ideas apart and we're stretching them to the extreme. And I think things like empathy and love and caringness and compassion aren't just buzzwords. They're not just things that we say because right now it's convenient or it's popular. I mean, I think it needs to be true. Necessarily, it must exist for human beings to be able to coexist. And if we're not prepared to coexist, what is the point? The point can't be to create conflict. We spend so much energy on conflict resolution, whether that's effective conflict resolution or going to guns. I don't know that we spend enough time trying to avoid conflict in the first place. And I think that the root of a lot of conflict comes from these polarizing opinions. So next time you get raged, next time you get upset, next time that someone else gets upset, maybe ask yourself if you're living in the extremes, if you're creating this polarization, and work on living in the gray. Thanks. Have a great day.